Chaos fans, me Megashark, and today I'm reacting to Doctor's Bob's, and this is the SCP 5852. You've got teeth in your bugs, so let's get to it.
After cleaning up the last of the blood, the priest splashes water on his face, hoping the chill will help steady him, steel his nerves ahead of the ceremony. He's performed dozens, hundreds even, knows the order of service for a Catholic wedding by heart. That was until it had found him. The Faith Eater, he calls it. When it first appears, or rather, its voice does, the priest falls for its trick. He thinks it's the voice of God speaking, reaching down from the heavens to offer up divine wisdom. But the more strange things the voice tells the priest to do, the more he begins to wonder. Then it starts telling him about the weddings, what to do, who to accept, how many it needs, and where to expect the harbinger. It looks almost satanic the first time, the sights and sounds of what could only be an unholy ritual. But wrestling with it afterwards, the priest believes the lies told by the Faith Eater, that this is all part of the grand plan. The harbinger is only present at these services to help determine who is worthy and who isn't. For a time, the priest resigns himself to his own lack of understanding. The Lord's ways are not his to know, his methods beyond the comprehension of a mortal. But he still has nightmares about all the blood.
That is bad.
Lifting his head and looking at himself in the mirror, the priest clenches a fist, trying to stop the trembling of his fingers. The voice of the Faith Eater is still in his head, telling him that its harbinger has arrived. The door opens behind him, and the priest sees the figure in the mirror behind him. They always look the same, always appearing as a man of middle age. But beneath the surface, it has no organs, its body made of the same fibrous tissue as an insect, hair and teeth formed from chitin. This is more cicada than man, just like the Faith Eater itself. It's always nerve-wracking, performing the ceremony knowing there's one present who doesn't belong. The priest always expects there to be a perceptive child or someone, anyone, on the bride or groom's side to point out there's a stranger standing among the groomsmen, that the harbinger will be noticed and the subterfuge will be gone. But it never happens. They're always happy to see Cousin Johnny, as they call it, and laugh at its jokes. They seem to be able to understand the jumble of words that the priest can hear it speaking in. The priest feels his heart racing as he gets through the order of proceedings, drumming at his ribs, knowing the time to exchange vows is getting closer and closer. The happy couple recite their beautiful words and give each other their rings, and a swell hits the pit of the priest's stomach. The harbinger, Cousin Johnny, as they know him, steps forward with multiple pairs of pliers in his hands, just like the previous time. He passes them around the other groomsmen he'd been hiding amongst, and the bridesmaids, compelling them to start wrenching their teeth out one by one. There are no screams, no signs of pain, just copious amounts of blood pouring from the wounds in their mouth. As the harbinger gathers up the removed bloody teeth and presents them to the bride and groom, the newlyweds start eating. The crack of their own enamel, jawbones breaking, is sickening, every time causing the priest to avert his eyes and look upwards. Sometimes he prays to the real God, not the Faith Eater, that this nightmare will cease. Other times, he just stares at the church's rafters. This time, he spots something secluded among the old woodwork overhead, the only other witness to the objectionable ceremony below. A nest of cicadas. Of all the areas of public life that the SCP Foundation keeps under surveillance, one might not expect the world of dentistry to be the one that warrants so much observation. Yet, over the years, if the Foundation's mission has come to prove anything, it's that anomalies can and will occur almost anywhere, in the most likely or unlikely of places, including inside human teeth. Some Foundation agents have spent tireless years, even entire careers, embedded as assistants, receptionists, and other members of staff at dental practitioners, on the lookout for SCP incursions. While under deep cover at these establishments, agents are tasked with keeping a close eye on the medical and dental records of patients, and are instructed to report any potentially anomalous conditions to the Foundation. One recent incident took place at a rural dentist's office in New Mexico. The patient, an unassuming average male, had booked an appointment with a local dental surgery, complaining of a mild pain within his jaw, in and around his canines. The dentist, a man named locally as Uncle Ted, given his reputation as a friendly family dentist, performed a routine examination on the patient, expecting that the man had little more than a minor toothache. On first glance, Uncle Ted thought he was looking at an ectopic growth, wherein a tooth grows in an abnormal position, usually stemming from the root. Shifting his tiny mirror around, he wasn't certain. It could have been a gemination, where a developing tooth splits into two teeth. But the patient had said this pain had only started up relatively recently. On top of that, his teeth were all fully developed. Either one of these conditions would have been noticed much sooner. What he saw when he looked in the patient's mouth was something entirely different. In his uncertainty, the dentist probed at the afflicted tooth with one of his implements, and to his horror, saw something was burrowing inside the tooth. Unbeknownst to him, both the patient and his assisting dental nurse had been undercover operatives of the SCP Foundation and had been waiting for exactly this moment. Now able to get visual confirmation of the anomaly, the assistant locked the dentist and patient inside the office and called in the incident. Within a matter of moments, operatives of the Foundation's Mobile Task Force Lambda 12, also known by the codename Pest Control, had arrived on the scene to detain the patient and bringing Uncle Ted the dentist into custody as a witness to be dosed with amnestics. What he had just witnessed was a cicada crawling into the man's tooth. The SCP Foundation has given this designation to a phenomenon that affects members of the superfamily Cicadidae, or more colloquially known as cicadas. What do insects like these have to do with teeth? Well, instances of SCP-5852 are cicadas afflicted with an anomalous growth of human teeth. The development of SCP-5852 has, at present, never been recorded occurring with the teeth of any other species, only human. In addition, researchers at the SCP Foundation have extensively examined each known case of cicadas being afflicted with SCP-5852 growths. As far as anyone is aware, there is nothing linking any of these cases of SCP-5852 infestations. Each recorded specimen afflicted with them have nothing in common, from genetic background to the region the insects inhabit. All SCP Foundation researchers looking into the phenomenon of SCP-5852 seem to concur that these teeth can manifest at random inside any cicadas on the planet. As a result, physical containment of potential specimens is impossible, given the sheer numbers of cicada populations in the wild, all of them considered to be potential specimens. Those known to be afflicted with SCP-5852 instances are referred to under the designation of SCP-5852-1. A cicada becomes one of these when a growth begins, typically occurring when the insect makes direct external contact with an SCP-5852 instance or another infected SCP-5852-1. However, in some cases, researchers have observed a selection of instances wherein infectees suffer an internal onset growth of SCP-5852, seemingly having had no other contact with the anomalous insects. Essentially, they can grow on or in any affected specimen. Once a cicada has been infected, the SCP-5852 growth will begin by manifesting within its body. This can cause anything from mild pain to intense discomfort to the cicada, which only worsens as the growth gets larger. When this occurs, anomalous teeth sprout from it, and these can pierce through an SCP-5852-1 infectee's soft tissues surrounding the developing tooth. As the teeth increase in number, continuing to grow and damage these tissues, it can lead to fatal injuries within the affected cicada, especially if the teeth emerge within and cause damage to the insect's nervous system or cardiovascular system. During experimentation, Foundation research teams have discovered that intervening while these SCP-5852 growths are occurring has proved impossible. One test involved making numerous attempts to counteract the rapid growth of more teeth using targeted injections of acid. Researchers theorized that because human enamel is mostly comprised of a crystallized mineral called hydroxyapatite, that a sufficient application of acid would trigger demineralization, essentially dissolving the teeth growing on SCP-5852-1 instances like salt crystals in water. However, given that acid with a pH lower than 5.5 was required in order to demineralize enamel, this also meant that the infected cicadas were dissolved. Further experimentation with lower measures of acid also resulted in failure. Inevitably, a cicada that has become an instance of SCP-5852-1 will continue to anomalously grow teeth out of its body until they break through the insect's exoskeleton. Once this has happened, it will become entirely overwhelmed by teeth, but will attempt a desperate effort for survival. As is well known among those who live in areas where cicadas emerge en masse after their long period spent dormant, these insects are infamous for shedding their exoskeletons in a process similar to molting, in a process commonly referred to as sloughing. SCP-5852 infected cicadas will attempt the same when overwhelmed by teeth growths. Foundation entomology experts have since gathered up some of these sloughed exoskeletons and have run numerous tests on them. Conducting close analysis, the Foundation has determined that these exoskeletons are comprised entirely of hydroxyapatite. That's the aforementioned naturally occurring calcium mineral found in tooth enamel.
Yeah.
When an instance of SCP-5852-1 sheds its calcified exoskeleton, this signals the termination of the insect's life. In every documented case, the process always results in the death of an infected cicada specimen. This occurs when the teeth that have grown on their old exoskeletons pierce and rupture the softer, underdeveloped exoskeleton the cicada grows to try and replace it. These are far more fragile, and damaging it is enough to kill an SCP-5852 infected cicada, if it hasn't already been killed by having its body ruptured by the teeth growths. Foundation research teams have closely examined the conditions of the teeth that grow as the result of an SCP-5852 infection, and have concluded that over 30% are discolored. Just under 30% possess some form of cavity, and there have, at a lower rate, been instances where an SCP-5852 has manifested as malformed teeth. Some of these have been observed as containing teratomas, a rare form of germ cell that can create tumors in fully formed tissues, including within teeth. Smaller percentages of the teeth that develop in SCP-5852-1 instances are either macrodontia or microdontia, teeth that are either larger or smaller than the average size. Meanwhile, as few others have grown as germinated teeth, wherein one of the developing growths splits into two teeth, or ectopic growths that causes them to form in abnormal positions or grow at an angle. Although some Foundation researchers have pointed out that a tooth growing out of a cicada could easily be considered an abnormal place for teeth to develop. Arguably strangest of all, however, is the 1.45% of SCP-5852 teeth that grow out of infected cicadas in the exact same condition as teeth that have undergone some form of dental restoration or cosmetic repair work. How is this able to occur without the aid of a trained dental professional is still unclear, and a question that has baffled Foundation researchers. The widespread nature of SCP-5852 has made it hard, if not entirely impossible, for the Foundation to contain it. The Foundation themselves have not been exempt from directly experiencing outbreaks of SCP-5852. An incident arose on the 21st of July 2012, significant for marking the first recorded instance of SCP-5852, which normally only affects cicadas, affecting humans. On the day in question, senior Foundation researcher at Site-21 and leader of the team handling the experimentation with SCP-5852-1 specimens, Dr. Charles Greaves, would request a medical examination with an on-site physician. He complained that he'd been suffering with a mild toothache that seemed to be affecting his canines, and the severity of it had gotten so bad that it was affecting his ability to focus and function during work at the Foundation. Shortly after, his request for an examination was approved, and he was submitted to the Site-21 medical office for treatment. The Foundation doctor, in an effort to remove Dr. Greaves' toothache, saw fit to entirely remove the affected teeth. This took little more than conducting a routine extraction and pulling the researcher's canines out, but afterwards, to the horror of both Greaves and the man now looking at his removed tooth, there was something living inside it. Several juvenile, developing instances of Magicicada cassinii, referred to colloquially and among entomologists as the 17-year cicada, or dwarf periodical cicada, had somehow burrowed their way into Dr. Greaves' teeth. The entirety of Site-21 was placed on an immediate lockdown as the Foundation struggled to ascertain exactly how these cicadas had gotten into someone's teeth. In order to gauge just how widespread the anomalous incident was, every member of staff was requested to submit to a mandatory tooth examination.
That's a good idea.
Over the course of several hours, it was subsequently discovered that every member of Site-21 personnel who had been assigned to researching SCP-5852 had numerous specimens of cicadas burrowing in their teeth. Checking personnel work logs, there appeared to be a breach and one that risked further potential spread of this infection. A Foundation security guard had been given several days of unpaid leave due to similar symptoms to Dr. Greaves, having reported his toothache a few days prior to the senior researcher. Unlike Greaves, however, the guard was not granted an on-site examination and was forced to instead consult a local dentist and wasn't permitted to return to work until his toothache was resolved. Said civilian dentist, one Theodore Uncle Ted Robinson, would subsequently witness a cicada burrowing into the guard's tooth during the procedure.
Yep.
Fortunately, another Foundation operative was also present during the guard's checkup, and this agent, posing as a dental assistant, was able to contact the Foundation for support.
That is
Presently,
good.
the offending security guard has been made redundant and received severance without pay. Meanwhile, in his absence, Mr. Robinson's small practice was forced to shutter its doors permanently. Amnestic treatment was administered to the now former dentist. However, an adverse reaction led to exacerbated memory loss prior to Mr. Robinson's release from Foundation custody. The Foundation considers its efforts to contain the SCP-5852 related outbreak a marked success thanks to minimal civilian witnesses and no casualties. The live cicada specimens that were extracted from affected personnel were kept and studied closely. Each one would begin to develop SCP-5852 tooth growth soon after. When analyzing these instances of SCP-5852-1, research teams discovered that the teeth being grown by these cicadas were exact, identical matches to their own teeth.
Wow.
The teeth of the previous hosts were now growing out of the infected insects. Though how exactly this occurred, or even how the cicadas were able to burrow into staff members' teeth at all, remains unclear. Following this incident, personnel were instructed to never directly handle instances of SCP-5852-1 and make no skin-to-skin contact with any of the cicadas, regardless of whether they were alive or dead. It remains a mystery to SCP Foundation researchers exactly what is responsible for causing SCP-5852 outbreaks among cicada populations. Nothing has been gleaned about the precise origin of the phenomenon, despite extensive experimentation and examination of infected SCP-5852-1 instances. Given that the tooth-growing phenomena can occur at random among cicada populations, and the fact that this makes containing SCP-5852 somewhat troublesome, the Foundation has been forced to come up with alternate procedures in order to keep public awareness of SCP-5852 as minimal as possible. A cover story was devised and disseminated to civilians through the use of local and nationwide media. Stories began cropping up, especially in areas known for having sizable populations of cicadas, of a condition affecting the insects. This was referred to as tumorous growth disease, providing a plausible explanation for the toothy growths affecting the cicada populations. Later, this cover story was further pushed by Foundation-aligned entomological experts, further promoting the notion that cicadas afflicted with tumorous growth disease could spread a form of mange, a skin disease normally caused by mites and seen in dogs, but that can also result in rashes and irritation in humans, as well as the risk of secondary infections. The result of these cover stories to explain the presence of tooth-riddled cicadas to the public has, for the most part, had the intended effect of prompting civilians to avoid cicadas when they are no longer dormant. This has also led to most civilians avoiding making any contact with the corpses or discarded exoskeletons of the insects out of concerns around the fictitious cicada mange. No further incidents of cicadas burrowing into teeth, like the one that occurred at Site 21, have been noted. Given their propensity for tracking, containing, and, when necessary, exterminating anomalous organisms such as insects and vermin, Mobile Task Force Lambda-12 have been assigned as the first response team when dealing with SCP-5852 outbreaks. Should any infected cicadas be reported or found in the wild, then Pest Control are sent to secure them and return them to the Entomology Department of Site 21. So far, very few at the Foundation have questioned why SCP-5852 specifically affects insects of the superfamily Cicadidae, and no other entomological group, or why certain other anomalies also seem to revolve around cicadas. One member of personnel, Research Assistant Wolfie Dalebro, did, however, raise this question in a small online forum connected with the Gamers Against Weed, an online collective known to create anomalies for their own amusement. In his post, Wolfie highlighted that there seemed to be some tangential link between SCP-5852 and SCP-2852, a figure known colloquially as Cousin Johnny. SCP-2852 has been known to appear at various Catholic and Anglican religious functions, more specifically at baptisms, weddings, and funerals. An appearance of SCP-2852 often results in ceremonies taking a disturbing and violent turn. which also all seem to be connected to cicadas in some way.
Yep.
Weddings affected by SCP-2852 are referred to by the Foundation as white level events, and Wolfie Dalebro had discovered that one of these took place in the same location that SCP-5852 was first discovered. Templeton Memorial Church, located in Templeton, West Virginia, had been the site of a white level event several years prior to the discovery being made. A nest of cicadas infected with the anomalous growths, the first recorded instances of SCP-5852-1, were found nesting in the roof of Templeton Memorial Church by Foundation agents clearing up evidence of the disastrous wedding that had been visited by Cousin Johnny. It is unclear if this insect nest was present during the white level event, and if SCP-5852 was somehow the result of SCP-2852's presence. Since postulating about a connection between SCP-5852 and SCP-2852, Research Assistant Wolfie Dalebro has since been removed from his position at the Foundation. In 2021, he was discovered to have been engaging with the forum connected with the Gamers Against Weed group and was administered with amnestics following his subsequent termination. It is still unclear if this research assistant was able to learn the connection between SCP-5852 and Imago. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-478, Tooth Fairies.
I already done that one. See what other ones he's got. Which maybe not Sand Devil. I might do this one.
Faces flush, palms sweat, hearts race, butterflies flutter their way through stomachs, all at the mere sight of that one special person. There's nothing in the world quite like that first blush of young love. It's a powerful feeling, the sort of feeling that makes kids write flowery poems and stuff them into lockers, that makes teenagers get a part-time job, all so that they can buy 2 movie tickets and all the concessions their date desires. And on this particular Friday night, one young man is cooking a full dinner for the first time in an attempt to impress his new girlfriend. Well, she's not just his new girlfriend. She's his first girlfriend, the girl he's loved since they were little kids running through sprinklers together. He got up the courage to confess his feelings and ask her out, and much to his delighted surprise, she said yes. His parents are out of town for the weekend, and it's the perfect time to have her over. So now, with his mom's recipe book in hand and determination in his heart, he's giving fettuccine Alfredo his best shot. Suddenly, he hears the doorbell ring. She's here. She's early. He throws the cookbook onto the counter and rushes to the door. He opens it and finds his date standing there wearing a new dress. She looks beautiful, and his heart leaps into his throat at the sight. He stammers, barely able to get the words out. Then the smoke alarm begins to screech from the kitchen. The pasta! He sprints to the kitchen, but it's too late. It's all gone up in smoke, and the promise of a perfect date with it. He turns to apologize, but she just laughs. Not in a mocking way, but like the disaster is just a private joke the two of them can share. In 30 minutes or less, the two young lovers are splitting a pizza, and the night is saved. The conversation slows to a lull, and they just look at each other. This is the moment. The sort of moment people write songs about. It's now or never. He leans in. She closes her eyes. He closes his. Their lips touch, and he swears that he can see fireworks. Wait, that's not in his imagination. He opens his eyes just in time to see a bright light, the brightest light he's ever seen, flood the room.
Gosh.
With it comes a searing pain, ripping through his body, causing him to cry out. Then, when the light fades, and the pain with it, he is sitting there, alone.
What
the girl
happened to
is
her?
gone. and all that remains is the dress she was wearing, crumpled in a heap on the floor. For a moment, the young man just sits there, staring at the place where his first love once sat. Then, the panic hits, overwhelming his senses.
What happened?
He grabs
to
his
her?
phone and dials 911. When the operator answers, he struggles to explain exactly what happened. One minute, his girlfriend was sitting there. The next, she was just gone. As he sputters and sobs his way through the story, the operator gets the gist of it. There's a girl who's gone missing. An hour later, the police come knocking on his door. He tells them the same story, wiping the tears from his eyes as he recounts the impossible flash of light that stole her away. They take some notes, exchange a few raised eyebrows. They're going to talk to the girl's parents to see if anyone knows what could have happened. As they talk, they take notice of the girl's dress, abandoned on the floor. They ask to take it with them, and then they leave. The next day, the police come back, and instead of bringing any answers, they tell the young man he has a right to remain silent. Anything he says can be used against him in a court of law. As the cops lead him into the police car parked outside, he demands to know what is going on. He's being arrested, one officer explains, on suspicion of homicide. What? They think he killed her? That's impossible. He tries to tell them how he would never hurt her, how he loves her and wants them to find out what happened to her. But they won't listen. They drive him to the station, toss him in a holding cell, and let him use his one phone call to tell his parents what happened. They're going to drive back as fast as they can to call a lawyer to do something. They won't be able to get there until the next day. For now, the young man is on his own. He doesn't know how long he sits there in that empty holding cell, mind reeling. They took his phone when they brought him in, and there's no clock visible from here. The minutes creep by at a snail's pace, while he grieves the life he had only 24 hours ago. It's all gone now. No matter what happens next, it'll never be the same. He is just about to drift off into a dreamless sleep of pure exhaustion when he hears a voice. There are two men standing at the door to his cell, dressed in suits. He doesn't recognize them. They aren't cops. At least, they aren't any of the cops he's seen so far. He asks them what they want with him. They tell him not to worry, that he's being transferred to a new facility. His parents have already been notified, they promise, but something in the young man's gut tells him that they are lying. He shakes his head and refuses to go with them. A transfer in the middle of the night without him even talking to a lawyer? Something is wrong. The men open the door to the cell and step inside, telling him that he doesn't really have a choice in the matter. They received orders from their superiors to come and collect him, and that's exactly what they're going to do. Each man grabs hold of one of the boy's arms as they drag him through the door, leading him down the hall. His heart rate spikes, his stomach turning with pure panic as adrenaline floods his body. He has to get away, has to do something to escape. All of a sudden, that familiar pain tears through him again, and he doubles over in agony. There's a crackling sound, like lightning striking. The bright, searing light fills the hall, and there's a whiff of something like ozone in the air. Then, the mysterious men are gone, without so much as a trace left behind. The young man's eyes dart around the room. There's no one else here, no one to stop him from making a break for it. So he does. He runs through the nearest door, out the exit, and keeps running. He knows he's breaking the law, digging his own grave even deeper. It definitely looks suspicious to run away from the authorities when you're already a murder suspect. But it would be way worse to stay behind and possibly be blamed for even more disappearances that weren't his fault. So, he runs. His desperate escape leads him out into the woods, to an abandoned cabin where he used to play as a child. He can hide out in here, at least for a while. What comes next? He doesn't know yet, and tries to put the thought out of his mind. Focus on making it through the night first, he tells himself, then worry about the future. As his breathing slows, the adrenaline fading from his body, he feels a heaviness overtake him. He's exhausted, more exhausted than he's ever been in his life. He slumps against the wall, then to the ground, letting the fatigue take him. Nothing else to do. Might as well get some sleep. When the young man wakes up, he's in an unfamiliar room. Not the cabin, not the jail cell, and certainly not his bedroom at home. There are fluorescent lights overhead and stark, white walls all around him. He's lying in what appears to be a hospital bed. He goes to sit up and realizes that he's been strapped down. As he begins to panic,
He's in
a doctor
the-
approaches him.
The
Or
code
he thinks the man must
SCP.
be a doctor.
He's in the
He's wearing a
SCP
white coat, carrying a clipboard. The man speaks in a pleasant, friendly tone, with just the slightest hint of clinical distance behind it. He tells the young man not to be afraid, and that no one is going to hurt him as long as he cooperates. He asks where he is, but the doctor doesn't answer. He struggles against the straps pinning him to the bed, demanding to be released. He asks for his phone, for a way to contact his parents or call a lawyer. The doctor does not answer. Then, that sudden pain, that crackling sound, that burst of light. The straps vanish, and the young man jumps off of the bed. But his legs are weak and unstable, his body still exhausted. He collapses and is strapped down all over again. The cycle repeats again and again like that for hours, until the young man gives up. He begs the doctor to please just tell him where he is. The man relents and explains that this is a place called the SCP Foundation.
Yep.
He has been placed there after being removed from police custody, and he is, unfortunately, going to be there for quite a while.
Yep.
The young man doesn't yet know what this means, but he has been given an official designation. SCP-213. SCP-213 is an adolescent human male about 1.5 meters tall and weighing around 95 kilograms. SCP-213's most anomalous trait is his ability to forcefully sever the bonds between the atoms in any solid or semi-solid matter that he comes into physical contact with. When this effect manifests, it is accompanied by a blinding flash of light. This effect can be triggered by any part of SCP-213's body, as long as it comes into physical contact with the affected being or object.
Yep.
For example, projectiles that have hit SCP-213's body in various places have been vaporized in this way on impact. The effect is not only devastating for whatever is being disintegrated, but also causes severe pain to SCP-213 himself. During several recorded manifestations of the effect, the pain has been intense enough to render SCP-213 unconscious. According to his file, SCP-213 has never been particularly happy to be in Foundation custody. It isn't hard to see why. I can't say I would have enjoyed spending my youth locked up in a scientific research facility, even one in picturesque southern Italy. Unfortunately, there is currently no ethical alternative that I can see. If SCP-213 were permitted to walk free, he could cause untold damage to the surrounding population, the ecosystem, and humanity as a whole. So, tragic as it is, he must remain in containment in order to prevent any innocence from being disintegrated. SCP-213 made 6 escape attempts during his first 6 months in containment. After all of these failed, he began to plan his 7th. He took his time, waiting several months for the Foundation to let their guard down. Then he requested an interview with one of the head researchers assigned to his case. When security personnel disengaged most of the containment procedures in order to let her into the chamber, SCP-213 used his ability to vaporize the doors to the chamber and make a run for it. Unfortunately, when the researcher and 2 other agents attempted to grab hold of SCP-213 to stop him from escaping, they were disintegrated by his anomalous ability. Once he escaped his containment chamber, SCP-213 was faced with a new obstacle. He had no idea which way the exit was. He had only seen a limited portion of the facility, so he knew next to nothing about its layout, or even how large the building actually was.
It's really
He ran as
large.
fast as he
It's
could
really
in a
big.
randomly chosen direction, but was quickly surrounded and overwhelmed by security personnel. Using his effect to escape his cell had sapped his energy and left him exhausted, and he collapsed to the ground after approximately 15 minutes of freedom. He was found in the staff break room, trying desperately to break through the floor and escape into the lower levels of the building. But his proverbial battery was drained, and he was unable to do anything other than follow the security guards back to his cell. Following this failed attempt, SCP-213 seemingly abandoned his pursuit of escape. But there would be more of his containment breaches. The security cameras in SCP-213's cell captured footage of him sleeping, tossing and turning as if having a nightmare. Suddenly, there was that recognizable flash of light. When the light was gone, so was the bed and a portion of the floor. SCP-213 awoke in freefall as he plunged through the floor and into a basement level of the site. Thankfully, he landed on a pile of mattresses that had been placed into storage down there, and was not injured. As this particular containment breach was obviously unintentional, he was not issued any punishments. A researcher's note was added to the file following this incident, which reads as follows. From study of this video, it is clear that SCP-213's control of the effect is not as perfect as it previously believed, and it has become more cooperative with us in trying to establish a method to control and utilize it. Vague conjecture on the part of the review staff as to possibilities of what would occur should the effect
really
trigger accidentally, including SCP-213 self-vaporizing, are noted as being particularly useful in this regard. From here, the relationship between SCP-213 and the Foundation became a great deal less antagonistic. It seemed that the Foundation and SCP-213 shared a common goal.
Yeah.
They both wanted to get to the bottom of SCP-213's anomalous properties and determine what exactly was causing them. From there, perhaps they could learn how to properly control them and prevent any more unintended casualties. SCP-213 was contained in a high-security humanoid containment cell within Site-77 in southern Italy.
Yeah.
His containment chamber was surrounded by a 10-meter-wide zone filled with gaseous materials that are corrosive to human skin. SCP-213 was kept informed of the nature of his containment in order to prevent manifestations of his anomalous effect that might result in additional containment breaches. There were 2 guards positioned outside of the containment chamber at all times.
That is good.
These guards were required to be armed with high-pressure hoses, oleoresin capsicum, or pepper spray, and
That's
polymer
cool.
web grenades, just in case.
Just in
These
case
containment
he
procedures served
wants
SCP-213
to
well
escape
for
again.
some time. Then, during a routine physical examination of SCP-213, everything the Foundation thought they knew about him changed.
Yeah.
The exam was off to a perfectly ordinary start when the physician happened to notice some lesions on the young man's
What
back.
is that?
At first glance, they appeared to be smooth nodules resembling a cyst or a small lipoma. However, the physician could tell right away that these were no ordinary cysts. There were 4 of them, positioned on
What are
SCP-213
they?
at precise intervals of exactly 15 centimeters to form a perfect square. Additional medical personnel were assigned to monitor this condition in case of any changes, and follow-up examinations were scheduled. During the first follow-up examination of SCP-213, medical staff discovered 2 more nodules, each located in the center of one of the young man's palms.
Wow.
When asked if the nodules were causing any pain or discomfort, SCP-213 shrugged and said that they were a bit irritating, but otherwise had not given him any trouble. Next, the medical personnel attempted to prick one of the nodules with a scalpel. The physician held the patient's hand steady, then attempted to excise a sample using the scalpel. However, the scalpel was unable to cut into the flesh.
Really?
After a few seconds
Wow.
of trying, there was a flash of light, and the scalpel was vaporized. SCP-213 was questioned about this, of course, but insisted that he did not do it deliberately. Over the next few days, his energy levels dropped to a notable degree, and he began to complain of extreme pain in his back and stomach. The following week, security guards spotted SCP-213 having a seizure in his containment cell. He was
my
immediately
gosh.
taken to intensive
That's
care.
not good.
When he was examined, medical staff were disturbed to see an additional 10 nodules on his back, placed at exact 5-centimeter intervals. In spite of his complaints of stomach pain and the aforementioned seizure, SCP-213 continued to insist that he felt no pain from the nodules themselves. After the examination concluded and his vitals were
He
found to be
needs
normal, he
surgery.
was sent back to his containment cell.
He needs
Additional medical
surgery.
observers were assigned to monitor his condition alongside the guard
goodness.
staff already placed there. During the next follow-up examination, the medical examiner noted an unsettling change. All of the nodules, every single one, had vanished. In their place, SCP-213 was now covered with tiny incisions, less than 1 millimeter wide,
Whoa.
wherever there had once been a nodule. Naturally, the examiner wanted to take a closer look. He started with the incision on SCP-213's left hand, lifting it close to his face to thoroughly inspect it. As he gazed into the medical mystery before him, the tiny
my
little
gosh.
slit in SCP-213's palm opened.
It's eyes.
Something was gazing
It's
back.
eyes.
She gasped and dropped the young man's hand in shock. Further examination confirmed her worst fears. There was an eye behind each of the lesions on the young man's body. Something was living inside of him, and it was watching. He was placed in the medical wing for an extended stay as research staff scrambled to find an explanation. After several weeks, they managed to arrive at a conclusion. SCP-213 was infested with a parasite of unknown origin.
Yeah.
Despite attempts by the Foundation to open a line of communication,
guy.
the parasite inside of SCP-213 did not respond. It is unclear whether this was due to an inability to communicate or an unwillingness to do so. Whatever the case may be, whenever a person is in the vicinity of SCP-213, one of the lesions on his body will open, and one of those little alien eyes will peer out, observing the person until they are no longer in his presence. As you might expect, SCP-213's mental state has severely deteriorated since this revelation about his condition. He panics each time he spots one of the eyes opening, and has submitted multiple requests that the entity in his body be surgically removed. The requests have been denied, pending further research. An additional researcher's note was added to the file for SCP-213 following this development. It reads, "The organism inhabiting SCP-213 fails to show up on any medical scan we have at our disposal. The new hypothesis is that this effect actually serves to provide sustenance and self-defense, with repeated tests to determine the nature of the anomaly has led to increased growth. SCP-213 has been placed in a chemically induced coma until further research can be conducted regarding the nature of this parasite. Containment procedures slated for major revision." I feel a great deal of sympathy for SCP-213. The poor fellow has not had the best lot in life, has he? He accidentally vaporized his first love, was taken into custody by a mysterious secret organization, and now has been placed into a coma for the foreseeable future. All because of something he never chose, something he never had control over. Some entity with atom-splitting levels of power needed to hitch a ride and chose his body as the vehicle of choice. Where did it come from? What does it want? Will a normal life ever be possible for SCP-213? Right now, only the parasite knows. And it doesn't seem to feel like talking. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-6854, where the cog cows roam.
Okay, let's see another one. What I'm gonna do is this one.
A grisly incident occurs inside the popular storefront of Nintendo World at Rockefeller Center, New York. It happens during the announcement event of a brand new Pokémon game, the highly anticipated sequel to the classic spin-off game Pokémon Conquest. Fans from all over the world have shown up in order to show their love for the collectible monster franchise, but in the mere moments before the trailer could be shown, a rotten stench fills the air. A wafting cloud of poison gas sweeps low through the crowd, and the effects are immediately hazardous. A pair of young children in matching purple sweaters, marked with a distinctive symbol seen on a poison-type Pokémon, begin coughing and wheezing. These are not victims of the poison gas, but rather its inexplicable source. As the gas spreads through the store, the children begin to turn a bright shade of purple, and their skin becomes craggy and porous. Even more alarming is the fact that the siblings begin to fuse together, limbs retracting into their bodies, as the larger of the two becomes little more than an enormous floating face, with the younger as an attached growth. The smog is so thick at this point that few are able to see that the two children now bear an uncanny resemblance to Pokémon number 110, Wheezing. The gas has been noticed by most of the adults in the room, and a panic has caused the crowd to begin trampling each other for the exit. In the midst of the confusion, several people step on the transmuted children, causing them to cry out in pain, and in a state of distress, they unleash the lethal Pokémon move known as Explosion. From the outside, a sudden blast can be seen roaring through the interior of the store. The windows shatter immediately, and a heavily damaged life-size statue of the Nintendo character Donkey Kong comes sailing out into the street, where it lands roughly in the midst of New York traffic. The NYPD are en route to Nintendo World immediately, expecting that some sort of bomb has gone off. There's no way they could have predicted what horrors awaited them at the scene. The unwilling Wheezing is not the only transformed human within the event, and indeed, some far more aggressive and dangerous monsters have been made there. A cosplayer in a onesie that had been designed to resemble Pokémon number 448, Lucario, has awakened her defensive sensory abilities on instinct to avoid the damage. But this protective power has come at the cost of her humanity. Blue fur erupts in tufts from her skin, and her face elongates into a distorted, canine muzzle. Panic spreads across the morphing face of the cosplayer, and as she tries to get clear of the chaos, Her flailing limbs send other members of the fleeing crowd flying. The genetic alteration that gave her limbs and face a Lucario-like appearance have apparently changed her muscles to deliver spring-loaded blows on instinct. Another fan finds that his hoodie, which features the face of Pokemon number 94, Gengar, had bound itself to him and caused his body to be partially insubstantial, as if it were made out of gas. He could barely control the direction his body traveled in as the wind pushed him out of the store. Several police cars arrive at Nintendo World and see the floating Pokefan rising like a ghost above the streets. He has become like a human balloon, and there is no apparent way to get him down. One of the officers calls for a helicopter to arrive, and the rest proceed towards the source of the blast. Monster! Scream some of the fleeing survivors, pointing at the Lucario cosplayer. She raises her hands defensively, but this has the side effect of causing the bioluminescent cells that are now part of her paw hands to glow. The glare from this sudden reaction draws the guns of the cops, who aim for the cosplayer, unsure of what weapon she's carrying. Stay where you are! Drop your weapon! The officers shout. Help me, please! The Lucario cosplayer drops to her knees, reducing her threat level. From out of the smoke of the store come several more transmuted humans, most of them injured by the explosion. There was a three-legged being covered in pitch-black fur and sores weeping with yellow pus. Pokemon number 197, Umbreon, but its front leg was still a human arm. There was a bald blue man covered in a still-growing turtle shell, a middle-aged Pokemon number 7, Squirtle.
I feel sorry for them.
Smashing its way through the solid cement was a predator that was sleek in body, yet uncanny in movement. Pokemon number 445, Garchomp, a scaled humanoid monster that dragged its belly on the ground. The police were horrified as this legion of monsters crawled out into the street. Decades of media and conditioning led the cops to the only solution their currently broken minds could process. They opened fire with their firearms and screamed like babies at the scary creatures. Acting on instinct, the Lucario cosplayer moved at incredible speeds and dodged several bullets. She ran into a nearby alleyway and vanished from view. The other monsters were less lucky. Umbreon took a few bullets and dropped, while the Squirtle retreated into his shell as the bullets bounced off of the back of it. The Garchomp withstood a bit of weapons fire, but then burrowed into the street to escape. It soon found itself in a currently empty subway tunnel and made a mad dash for its escape from the authorities. Back above ground, the cops searched vigilantly for more of the creatures. As the helicopter sailed in, the floating Gengar drifted towards a tall building, phasing in through an open window. Once inside, the humanoid ghost Pokemon found itself much more comfortable in the shadows. The various employees of the office floor didn't feel the same, and were stricken with fear as they observed Pokemon number 94 turn invisible. His enlarged, grinning face disappearing as if he were the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. When firefighters started to mitigate damage at the scene, it became clear that at least 3 monsters were still on the loose. For now, the transformation instances were contained to the destroyed storefront of Nintendo World in Rockefeller Center. But if affected individuals were contagious, then the situation could go from bad to worse at an alarming rate. The police established a perimeter and used their private radio to put out an alert to every officer in New York that there were apparently monsters walking the earth. Descriptions of the roaming Pokemon that were still at large were given, and this prompted a lengthy discussion over the radio about the logic of Pokemon existing in the real world. Several of the senior officers didn't have any knowledge of the Pokemon franchise and had significant difficulty being brought up to speed on the events of the day. Despite the initial snafu in communication, the extraordinary details of the case became known to every available officer. There were 3 suspects. Pokemon number 448, Lucario, Pokemon number 94, Gengar, and Pokemon number 445, Garchomp. And the mission objective was to catch them all. With his invisibility and ghost-like material properties, Gengar had no difficulty hiding out in the office building. Though a brief look in one of the bathrooms showed him that invisibility was the best option for other reasons, as his face and body had deformed to the point that his head and torso had been fused together.
I feel sorry for them.
Additionally, spined growths of cartilage had begun to line his back, and they were starting to itch terribly. His eyes had enlarged and were now completely bloodshot red with dilated pupils. It would be a miracle if anyone recognized him as a human being in the shape he was in. His mind could hardly cope with the change, and created a false narrative to spare his sanity.
I'm dead. That's it. I died from that explosion and turned into a ghost like Gengar.
It wasn't the most convincing or uplifting lie to believe, but it was enough to keep him from the risk of exposing his nightmarish form to other human beings.
I feel
He became
sorry
determined to
for
haunt
him.
the office building as subtle as
my
he could,
goodness.
until things
Even
made
though
sense
they
again,
look like
even if they
monsters,
never
they
did.
still got their
Gengar
human,
turned invisible again
you
and
know,
faded into a non-existent
knowing.
presence within the building. He drifted unseen from workspace to workspace, unaware that his transformation was a curse that could be passed on. There were many office workers with Pokémon desk toys, and while the effects wouldn't be immediate, a dull ache began to set in across the office floors as bodies started to prepare themselves for transformation. Meanwhile, on the mean streets of New York, Lucario ran as fast as she could, quickly realizing that her muscles had become capable of great strides and leaps. She was able to scale brick walls and leap between rooftops like a trained parkour expert, and the exhilaration of such physical feats almost counterbalanced the sheer, mind-numbing terror of losing her original body to the Pokémon transformation. The sudden growth of a fuzzy tail from her lower spine jolted her back to the fear response, however, and in full panic mode, she refused to look at herself until she had successfully made it back to her apartment. The sounds of helicopters in the sky convinced her to stay away from the rooftops and move through the side streets until she was back in her neighborhood.
Stay away from
Along the way,
humans.
a young girl who was walking with her mother recognized Lucario and pointed her out. "Mommy, look! It's Lucario!" The mother took one look at Lucario and screamed, prompting Lucario to run away from the family as rapidly as she could. She tried to deny what was happening, but also had the sense to not pass through the front desk area of her apartment building. For some reason, all she could think of was Spider-Man, and the many scenes from various movies in which Peter Parker or Miles Morales had to hide their powers and abilities. In a very Spider-Person-like move, Lucario climbed in through the window. She didn't even have time to ponder how easy it had been to break into her own apartment before she took full stock of her situation. The transmutation into Lucario persisted, and had even absorbed her onesie into her biomass while removing its synthetic properties. The change was, to put it mildly, less aesthetically seamless than she hoped. Her mouth was somewhere between a wolf muzzle and human lips, and looked completely mangled from most angles. The blue tufts of fur that were Lucario's trademark were patchy and didn't fully cover her body. The bioluminescence that had alarmed the cops earlier was now randomly occurring on her body with no rhyme or reason. She had never considered herself part of that side of the Pokémon fandom, but even by their arcane yet discerning standards, her body had become hideous. Lucario wept, unable to imagine what she would do with herself. How would she tell her family, her friends, her boyfriend? Her life as a person was essentially over. And based on the attention the whole event had gotten from the police, it was most likely going to be followed by the law until her dying days. Down beneath the surface of the city, the third suspect, Garchomp, had been roaming through the subways and drawing a bit of attention. His movement through the tunnels had caused a great deal of collateral damage as his claws rend the concrete and stone. When the blinding lights of an oncoming train shone on him, Garchomp found out exactly how fast he could move, though that may have been adrenaline. He had to make a quick escape from the train and wound up on a crowded subway terminal where many onlookers snapped pictures of the apparent shark monster. Garchomp scrambled to try and find a place to hide, but the platform had so many people that trying to get through them resulted in bloodshed. Garchomp's rough scales flensed the skin right off several passersby, and his dorsal growths on his limbs were sharper than an iron blade. People started throwing things and shooting small arms at the monster, but Garchomp's skin was impervious to such weapons. Even the police bullets from earlier had been unable to pierce through the scales, but there was a cost to being bulletproof. The weight of the scales forced Garchomp to crawl clumsily along the ground, only reinforcing its appearance of monstrosity in the eyes of the public. Garchomp could still feel the pain of the impacts, like hard slaps against his skin. He almost wanted to cry from the pain, but there were no tear ducts behind his eyes anymore. Somehow, at the same time, something snapped inside of Garchomp. He wanted the violence to stop, and no longer cared how it did. And so, the transformed human went into a violent rampage that didn't recede even when the cops arrived. During this violent massacre, Garchomp had dissociated from the situation and felt like he could see the Pokémon that his body had begun to imitate facing off against a horde of enemies. He came to picture the other people as wild Pokemon themselves, and from his out-of-body vantage point, he saw himself as a Pokemon trainer, commanding himself in monster-to-monster combat. Go, Garchomp! I choose you! You'll never lose to them! Mach Punch! Outrage! Earthquake! Outside of the subway, there were tanks and other heavy-duty weapons ready to engage if Pokemon number 445 came to the surface. But unfortunately, it seemed to remain underground and in the presence of civilians. The only options remaining were to filter poisonous gas into the subway to knock the creature out, but there was still too much risk of innocent casualties. Though the cops did take down Garchomp with a rocket launcher, the incident was highly public, and the destruction caused in the firefight was unprecedented and brutal. Both Gengar and Lucario learned about the incident themselves later that evening, and it only strengthened their resolve to stay hidden and avoid contact with the outside world. Over the next few days, an elaborate media cover-up managed to spin the incident as a bombing of Rockefeller Center, unrelated to the Pokemon event or franchise. This was partially due to a certain powerful foundation pulling strings to ensure that the publicity of this event would not be focused on the humanoid Pokemon. This shift in reporting was spurred along by the distribution of amnestic drugs throughout Manhattan. As for any blind spots, the biggest asset to the cover-up was that it happened in the Big Apple. Weirder things have and are assumed to have happened every day in the city that never sleeps. And the jaded mindset of the denizens meant that all the rumors would fade away in a short while. But the threat of Pokemonification still loomed throughout the world, wherever the merchandise was freely circulated. Thus, in the modern day, a new war on Pokemon, a colder and more secretive war, was being fought through espionage and decisive operations. Though it might be infeasible to imagine that all memorabilia and products of the Pokemon Company could be seized by the authorities, the SCP Foundation has assigned much of its resources to scanning the existing stock for a catalytic component that results in the baleful transformation. This irreversible condition has been given the item designation of SCP-5254 and is considered part of the Keter object class. Of the 34 instances of SCP-5254 transformation that occurred following the incident in New York, only Pokemon 94, Gengar, and Pokemon number 448, Lucario, seemed to survive the day. Those that were neutralized through violence were also not the norm, as the vast majority of victims of SCP-5254 lost their lives during the process of the transformation itself. It's not hard to imagine the more humanoid and relatively human-sized Pokemon were a better fit for the continued life of the victim, as those who were changed into creatures with non-human body plans fared far less well on average. Pokemon with an insect-like or serpentine form showed a particularly low rate of survival among SCP-5254 instances, and this was also true for Pokemon that were more abstract in nature, such as many Pokemon based on inanimate objects. The SCP Foundation's official containment procedures when it comes to SCP-5254 is to terminate all instances, not only because of the irreversible harm and life-threatening condition inflicted on the victims, but due to the contagious nature of the SCP. As long as there is at least one human transformed by the effects of SCP-5254, there is an increased risk of other victims to experience their own transformation events. The greater the clustering of SCP-5254 affected individuals and the greater each individual's knowledge and affinity for the Pokemon franchise is, the more rapid the onset and severe the effects of the SCP-5254 transformation are. Extensive testing performed with D-Class personnel has also shown without a doubt that official apparel from the Pokemon Company is where the start of SCP-5254 begins, and that the vast catalog of collectible fictional creatures is narrowed down to single choice by whatever creature the individual most closely resembles at the time of the transformation. The effects are slightly diminished or delayed if the article of official Pokemon clothing depicts multiple creatures, but there's no guarantee that the individual won't experience a change in pigmentation of the skin or the growth of animalistic features in keeping with the most prominently displayed Pokemon. The lethality of the transformation varies, but the alterations happen on a cellular and genetic level. Autopsies of SCP-5254 instances have shown that organs and bones might be entirely replaced by foreign organic material.
Really?
Because very little of the original victim's body remains after a transmutation event, the extreme anomalous science involved in the creation of SCP-5254 remains beyond the SCP Foundation's ability to remedy or combat, even through the most extensive reconstructive surgeries. There is still an ongoing search for a person of interest who is known by the internet handle Sir Viper, and believed to be the culprit behind SCP-5254. A chain of email correspondence between Sir Viper and the employees of the Pokemon Company have been archived from the Foundation, and it seems as though the Keter-class SCP was allowed to happen in an official capacity because the Pokemon Company provided Sir Viper with some official merchandise in exchange for the promise of Pokemon being brought to life. The stockholders seem to agree that a world where Pokemon were tangible, breathing beings was one where even greater profits could be achieved.
Oh my
but the human toll and the reality of the product was anything but what they expected. One detail of the fictional world building in the Pokemon video games that is often overlooked, even by the creators themselves, is the adjacency between human beings and Pokemon when both exist within the same world. Though humans possess the power to build civilizations and cultivate ideals, Pokemon are equally powerful in the natural and spiritual worlds. They occupy a parallel existence that brings a cyclical balance to the world. While conventional science could never create a Pokemon, and the real world's evolutionary ecosystem could never produce one, Sir Viper is most likely someone who realized that the key ingredient needed to manifest real-life Pokemon is humanity itself. His experiments into human transmutation are founded on a philosophical basis rather than a literal one, focused on the inherent connection between Pokemon and people. The world cannot have one without the other, and in Sir Viper's eyes, the human lives sacrificed to bring Pokemon from the fictional world into this one were merely a redundancy. A mad scientist with a special interest in Pokemon, a worldwide franchise with more robust marketing arms than Pokemon number 68, Machamp, and the hapless runaway victims of transmutation who are still unwittingly spreading the anomaly. The SCP Foundation must endeavor to gain control of all three if it wishes to bring an end to SCP-5254. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-674, The Exposition Gun Makes Nintendo Real Life.
This be it right now, awesome fans. Don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment down below. Have a nice day, awesome fans. Bye.